All right, I'm thinking we're live. Can I just get confirmation? I think we're live. Thank you guys all for waiting for us. We had some technical difficulties connecting this morning, so hoping we had some folks join and are excited to get started with you all. Welcome. My name is Elyssa Morgan. I'm the Chief Growth and Partnerships Officer here at Niche. Really glad to have you here with us today. We're excited to host this conversation because it's one we're having a lot across the payments industry. So everything's moving faster. We have instant payments, real-time settlement, AI showing up everywhere, making things easier for people. You got emerging technologies like stablecoin, more partners entering the scene, and somehow fewer simple answers for everybody. Now, here at Niche, we work with hundreds of financial institutions, corporate practitioners, fintechs, third-party providers. And what I keep hearing from individuals at these organizations is I don't just need to know what button to push. I really need to understand what's actually happening under the hood. And that's really where the heart of today's conversation is going to go. So today, Mary and I will focus on accreditations and continuing education, and not from a resume exercise for you as an individual or even as a checkbox for an organization to say, hey, yeah, I have one of those on staff, which is definitely a good look, but more so as a way to build real technical depth within and across your organization. So the kind that helps you navigate the complexity of today's rapidly changing environment and to help you make better decisions when things aren't black and white. And I think we can all agree that we live in the gray space from day to day, especially us in operations. So this is a really timely conversation as well. So as we look ahead to not just Smarter, Faster Payments next week in San Diego, the emphasis for that event continues to shift towards subject matter expertise, operational readiness, innovation, and governance, and not just speed and adoption for speed and relevance sake. So I'm really lucky today to be joined by my colleague, Mary Morrison, who brings a deep experience on the education, implementation, audit, risk side of payments, and works really closely with professionals across, again, banks, credit unions, and fintechs every day. So Mary, did you want to introduce yourself and talk a little bit about the work you do here at Niche?
Sure. My name is Mary Morrison. As Elyssa said, I'm Director of Education here at Niche. And on a day-to-day basis, whether it is building and facilitating webinars and on-demands, pertaining to payments education, or whether it's answering our rules call hotline and speaking with members about, some of the troubles that they are finding, or some of the sticky situations, so to speak, right? Because payments are never the same thing every single time. I have been in payments for over 25 years, and I still get calls from our members, and I'm like, huh, never seen that before. So it is a rapidly evolving space, and even the standbys, you see something new every day because even if a payments channel is not necessarily evolving at the speed of light, say checks.
Yeah.
The fraudsters are, right? So you're continuing to see new things and to be challenged by new things, and that is probably a good segue into a little bit later in our conversation when we talk about continuing education, and staying on top of things.
For sure.
So that's really my day to day at Niche, is interacting with members and helping them in some of these situations that they find themselves in. I have been AAP certified now for since I think 2011. So for like
Nice.
about 15-ish years of my career. And then I am also APRP, AFPP, NCP, and CAM certified. So I've taken a multitude of the exams and, working through continuing education, and I have my own story there for that.
Yeah,
But
we'll get
we'll
into
talk
that
about
in a
that
bit for
later.
sure. Yeah.
But
Mary has so many accreditations, it's hard to fit them on a business card. So many of
it
them.
it is, or a name badge.
Yeah.
And really though, I don't like not knowing things, right? So when our members call, I want to be able to help them. I don't like not knowing. So that is one of the reasons that I have the certifications. It is because I want to continue to learn more about these payment systems and payments risk, so that I can be the most effective as possible, in my role. So
No, that's an awesome segue. So we do get to work with an amazing community of financial institutions, fintechs, you know, all sorts of corporate practitioners. And when they bring questions to us, it enriches the larger membership because we're able to find the answers working amongst the various experts we have on staff and like feed that value right back into the larger community. So that's great. And I think, Mary, you talking about the rules hotline and things like that, I think you'd agree with me when we talk to all of these different organizations, regardless of size, regardless of business models or goals, there's really a consistent theme that comes up. And it's kind of what you had just mentioned. People really care about getting things right. They want to know things. And so I don't necessarily think that that's like the big shift. I think what's really changed is the environment that they're now operating in and the speed at which they have to adapt. So we have some organizations operating across multiple payment rails. So they have ACH going, wires, instant payments, cards. They're already looking into stablecoin to see what that means to their business model, whatever the impact's going to be there. But then they're also still dealing with checks and the heightened fraud that's coming along with that, right? Then they're layering AI in, right? Processes that used to be very manual are now being made more automated and helping free folks up to be able to focus elsewhere. And each piece of that on its own makes sense, right? But the challenge, I think, is understanding how all of these things interact and then where the risk shows up between the layers. Roles themselves. So we, again, working with a lot of institutions, I think roles have actually expanded because of the fast pace of change here, faster than really job descriptions themselves. So someone who's used to focusing purely on payments operation is now touching on fraud, is touching on compliance, vendor management, even AI modeling, risk, and then oftentimes customer experience. They're all kind of mapped and tied together. And so that's really where this technical depth starts to matter is when you zoom out, you recognize you don't just need to know what rail's being used and what other ones could be used, but why. You don't just you know, need to understand why that AI model made that decision, how it's getting that information and how it's working, but really every step of the way, how it works, how it's configured, and then where are your controls in that situation and how are you meeting your obligations still while deploying AI and outsourcing to AI, right? Not just who owns a specific process, but then if something over here changes, how does that possibly break what's happening over here? What do changes have to downstream operations? And so that's kind of the backdrop for why accreditations show up differently, I think, today. Mary, what I want to do now is if we can kind of talk through the different accreditations themselves. So what they cover and what they're all really designed for. And I'm interested to ask you, because you have so many, exactly which one would you call your favorite?
oh,
I
so
have a favorite. I'm just wondering what your favorite is.
my favorite is 100 bajillion% the APRP.
I'm with you on that one. That one is
Um,
absolutely my favorite as well.
it was my favorite to study for.
Mhm.
And I feel like it brought me, I don't know, maybe the most context
Yeah.
of them. I most of my career was spent in deposit operations, and I started in checks. So baby operations, Mary, was a check processor first and foremost, and that is where I started my ops journey, and then it flowed into ACH and wire transfers, and the like. But being able to look at, because the APRP covers all the payment systems. So
Well,
the
let's just tell them
APRP,
real quick. Let's just tell them exactly what the APRP is. So the NACHA certification for accredited payments risk professionals. I didn't want to cut you off there, but I just want to clearly
no,
outline
all,
what that
yes, all
accreditation is.
good.
We all talk in acronyms, so folks who aren't used to that, I just want to let them know kind of what that stands for, and I'll hand it back to you though.
Yeah, and like Elyssa said, the accredited payments risk professional, and that covers ACH, check, card, wires, and then emerging and faster payments. So it really covers payments risk as a whole. You are getting some insight into all of the different payment systems. It's less about the rules for each payment system and more about how you manage risk and mitigate risk for each of those payment systems. So it really, and it's fascinating. It brings you into a lot of FFIEC guidance. Which is really fantastic stuff to know in the payment industry anyway. So I feel like it also gave me some insight into that I hadn't really paid a lot of attention to before because, you're doing your day to day. You're not always able to take some time out to like, oh, let me read through the retail payments manual. Like that'll be fun. And you don't have time to do that, but when you're studying for, to pass this exam, then you're definitely taking a closer look at those things. So yeah, it's 100% my favorite.
Mine
There's
too.
not even any. So sorry to the rest of them.
I know. No, they're
I
all
don't.
really good. We'll get into those too. They're already good, but I agree with you. Let's get into the more technical rule set, specific rail set accreditation. So if you wanted to cover the AAP for us.
Yeah, so the AAP is the accredited ACH professional, and that is going to dig deep, deep, deep into your ACH knowledge and comprehension. So one thing about all of these accreditations are they're not asking you to memorize, right? You don't have to, you're not memorizing, file formats and all of this kind of stuff. They're really testing your comprehension of how these things work. So it definitely isn't you're not taking a history exam, right, where you have to memorize 85 dates. It is a broader, more like a comprehension type exam. So knowing and understanding how the ACH network works. And a little bit of your other payment systems as well, not in depth, but understanding how other payment systems might interact with the ACH network. So there's, very little. It's a small portion of the exam, but it really is focused, right? So this is going to be more, I would say, the exam for this is one that's for your individual contributors, right? Your folks who are working the exceptions, your folks who are doing the returns, maybe your folks who deal with ACH disputes. Those are the folks that really, will benefit from this, as well as the people who are supervising those areas,
Yeah.
and potentially your auditors or your compliance folks who have some oversight of those areas. Because having someone who is an AAP do your ACH audit is different, right, than having somebody without it.
Right.
Because it not only lends credibility in the eyes of an examiner who's looking over your audit work papers or something like that, which is fantastic.
Yeah.
Um, but also you're gonna get a better audit because they understand, right? So if you have somebody who doesn't really understand ACH, they can go through audit procedures, right? And look at, oh, here's what I need to look at for this. But when it really comes to looking at a payment system and did they do this correctly and do they understand the nuances, right? An AAP will be able to listen to your employee say, oh, we had this really weird situation here, and that's why we had to use this return reason code instead of using that return reason code. And AAP is going to go, oh, that makes sense. That was, it makes sense in the context of what was happening, and that's fine. A non-AAP, somebody who doesn't have that in-depth understanding of the ACH network is kind of going to dig in their heels and be like, no, 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 the rules say this,
Right
right?
here
It's
in
very specific. It
subsection.
says this, right? So that is a very positive thing when you think about um, the audit side of things as well. And this is coming from someone who did in the last, I think, 3-ish years of before I came to Niche, I worked in internal audit. And that's the reason I have a CAM certification, because they wouldn't allow me to do the BSA audit unless I had one. I built their internal ACH audit, as opposed to, it wasn't a compliance audit, it was built as an internal audit. So all the 45 samples of this and that and the other thing. But I was able to see things that prior auditors did not see because
Yeah.
of my background.
It's really
Um,
that depth, that technical depth in a discipline. Like it's
mhm.
ACH is so technical that you would never expect it to be, but it really
Yeah,
is. And you'll miss it
yeah,
if you don't have that subject matter expertise for sure.
yep. And having your employees understand, right, the depths of the ACH operating rules and how the network functions is really fantastic from the standpoint of, right, somebody who's making that decision, right? Oh, this hit our non-post. Do I return it? Do I not? Can I post it? Should I not post it? Should I return it? How do I return it?
Yeah.
Right. Like there can be a lot to it, and it can be very nuanced. So it really is beneficial. There is, Nacha does require 1 year of payments experience. That is something you will see out on their website. When you go, if you go to look up the AAP, they recommend two.
Yep.
So this is something that someone who is relatively early in their career can take advantage of. It's not just for seasoned experts. Is the early in the career person, employee, going to need to study more? Sure. And are they going to need to study different things? Sure, right? Because if you're operations, you might have to really dig in to study for the cash management part,
Yeah.
right? The corporate, the corporate parts. If you're a treasury or cash management person, and you want to, do your AAP because you deal with a lot of this stuff day to day, operations might be something that you have to focus on a little bit harder,
Right.
because that's not your day to day. But this is really, to me, early career, advanced career, just depending on your role, and how much you have your hands in ACH.
Now let's move on to the newest and hottest NACHA accreditation. Let's talk about the Accredited Faster Payments Professional, or the AFPP.
Yeah, that one is faster payments. That covers same day ACH. It covers RTP, FedNow, push to card. I think I hit everything.
Yeah, they'll have
Um,
some dabble in some emerging technology, but for the most part, it's
yep,
more like the technical aspects of those rails and the risk
yep.
management that comes along with those. And
Yep. So this is going to be, one of those things again that is good for the folks who are, boots on the ground.
yeah,
Good for people supervising those areas. I didn't mention when I talked about AAP, but also AAP and AFPP, your product folks, right? You're
yes,
creating products. Those products need to be compliant, right? So don't forget about your product folks. But those folks who are working with those faster payment rails that you're now bringing in house or thinking about bringing in house. So it really, I sat for the exam last year. And I know Elyssa sat for it this year, so we are both AFPP certified. But it really did, because that was one area when I came to Niche, I did not have my hands in, right? I have directly had my hands in wires. I
yep,
have processed wires. I have processed, card disputes, ACH disputes. I've processed ACH transactions. I've
yep.
processed the heck out of like real live paper checks. Before image, I have converted checks to image. I never touched an actual RTP or Fed down
RTP.
payment.
I think you and I both actually came to Niche. So we came from different areas. So I came from a financial institution directly to Niche, and Mary came from a fintech to Niche.
Yep.
But yeah, I think that was before RTP FedNow was really mainstream and launched. So neither
Yep.
one of us kind of had the hands-on operational experience that we had with some of the other
Yep. And
accreditations.
it really helped me, and I won't speak for Elyssa, I'll let her speak for herself, but it really helped me understand it better. The studying for this exam and really, I not having it was a different experience, not having that frame of reference that I had for the APRP and the AAP and the NCP. It was very different not having that frame of reference, but
Yeah.
I do feel like I learned so much through that process that I think it is a really good it's something to think about if you're an institution who has adopted any of the faster payment rails or are considering it, to have somebody or somebody's who have a solid understanding.
Yeah, for sure. I think that there were some things that translated over, but I think it's because I already had my APRP, I already had my AAP, and it was
Yep.
relative, I guess you could say.
Hmm.
Um, what I really liked about the AFPP was figuring out, what is a good payment mix based on your customers, your use cases, and you do get into that on the AFPP. So understanding why faster payments is valuable to your organization or would be a great opportunity for you to better serve your customers was kind of cool too. So we're just going to cover the Notch accreditations today. Do know that Niche does have the NCP, the check professional. Mary, we have folks on staff that go beyond that
Yep.
level of expertise. So CAM certified, we have a fraud examiner on staff. So lots of resources for you here at Niche if you ever run into anything or you have questions on your path. But I do want to kind of bring this back around, and I really appreciated how you framed all of that, Mary, and how connected it all really is. These things don't necessarily live in silos anymore. So if you're just starting out in ACH or you're thrown into a position, I'm going to talk a little bit about my experience where you're going to see where that kind of happened for me. Or if you're in a leadership role and you truly want to understand what your people are doing, again, you're touching a lot of different places. And so this isn't siloed anymore. You want to make sure you have a full understanding. And from a higher level strategic perspective, if I was a senior leader setting strategy, payment strategy at, say, either a financial institution or a fintech, I would view accreditations less like education and more so about staffing infrastructure that is going to position us at the organization to execute our strategy safely and successfully. What I would call that accreditation infrastructure, I think, helps organizations build trusted judgment. They have people who understand how payments actually work, either within one rail or across rails, across risk types, and across teams, right? So, not just what the rules are, but why they exist, and then possibly even where pressure points tend to show up as things change. And that really matters because, for example, instant payments don't just move money faster, they compress timelines for fraud detection, for exception handling, for decision making. Another one, AI doesn't eliminate risk. It helps. It does a lot of things for you, but you still need that people powered current of compliance and risk management, right? So AI could just add another layer that has to be understood and governed. So, what organizations really need, I'd say, are people who can see across those layers, like you were mentioning, Mary. So, how are those rails interacting? How is automation shifting risk exposure? How can X impact Y? And accreditations really help build that system level thinking, right? So it moves beyond kind of where do I click to understanding what that click does and what actually happens after that. Um, a lot of us know when something goes wrong, and it often does, especially again, our operations folks. You live putting out fires all the time. that depth of knowledge is what's going to allow your teams to respond calmly and explain decisions with confidence. And it also makes you move faster in the right ways. Just because current expertise exists, though, that's not to say it will stay current forever. So I think that naturally can move us into this next space where how do people realistically, Mary, keep up as things continue to evolve, especially with accreditations and those continuing education credit requirements?
Yeah, so each of the accreditations, we'll button it down to the AAP, APRP, and AFPP. Not to require 60 total credits, continuing education credits in 5 years to renew that certification. At a max, you can do 20 per year, but 60 total in 5 years, it's really approximately 10 hours a year of continuing education, is what it boils down to if you divide it evenly throughout the year. So every 50 minutes of continuing education is 1 credit, and an hour is 1.2 credits. So you can get that by, taking different sessions, different learning opportunities in those subjects. NACHA also has other ways that you can earn continuing education credits, like for Elyssa and I, presenting on topics, allows for that. And there are some additional ways as well. I think the most, speaking at an event, and things like that. I think the most common is probably attending various webinars, and things like that to obtain those continuing education credits. That's going to keep you current, right? Because we all know how fast payments move and how swiftly these can change. Those exams are updated every year, right? Anytime something changes, they're updated. And by continuing to get your continuing education credits, that's how you are keeping up with that evolution. So if you don't, then you take the exam again if you want to renew your certification. And I have done that. I did not, from 2011 until I came to Niche, really keep up with my continuing education credits, at least not like officially. Um, I kept on top of things, but I didn't have anything that I could prove that was auditable, right? So did I keep up my knowledge? Yes, I tried the best I could. I was on top of, rule changes for in the ACH world and all of that good stuff. I had that NACHA page was bookmarked. But
Yeah.
attending classes and stuff, I managed a very hefty area of the fintech that didn't give me a whole lot of time. And, there were times I would sign up for something and then just never do it, because of that, So
Too
I
busy.
have taken the AAP exam 3 times. And
You're a glutton for punishment.
the third was when I came to Niche, and I had actually decided, you know what, I don't think I'm gonna I don't think I'm going to take the exam again, because I didn't feel like, studying for it and all of that. And then I got the job at Niche in September, and the exam is in October, and my AAP credential was expiring that year, so I had to take the exam that year anyway. But happily, I now get my continuing education credits because, I've joked around, but I've said I will not take CAMS again, and I will not take the NCP again. But it is important, right? And even if you decide that retaking the exam is the way you want to go, I do know certain people, I won't mention any names, who do that every 5 years. Um, it is still important to keep up with things, right? Because you want to be on top of those rules changes, particularly for
For
the
sure.
AAP. And then, for like the APRP, risk changes so much. There's constantly new threats out there that have to be managed, cybersecurity, and all that good stuff that goes into the APRP exam. So it is really key, regardless of how you're doing it, to ensure that you're staying on top of things, because those letters after your name, right, aren't going to mean a lot if they're outdated, right? So if you're not keeping up and it's been 4 years and things have massively changed and you haven't been on top of it, the advice that you give might not be so fantastic, right? So it is important, regardless of how you choose to, manage that continuing education, that you do stay on top of things, because things again change so fast.
They do. So thanks for that. And Mary, you shared a little bit about your experience, and I would love to get your perspective on the fintech side, because I'm going to explain a little bit about my own experience, because I think it reflects how a lot of people actually end up even in payments. And then possibly why you end up taking your lunch hour to sit with, through our nerdy accreditation LinkedIn Live. But I will mention a little bit about my journey and how I became accredited and how it really kind of shaped my career. And again, I came from a financial institution. So after this, Mary, I'd love to hear from a fintech perspective how it helped you. But you know, most people don't grow up and say, I want to be a payments professional. And there's really not a straight line education path that prepares you for this work straight out of school. It's something Nietzsche is trying to change, but it doesn't truly exist right now. Now, when I worked at a financial institution, I started out in retail. I went back office operations to deposit operations as an assistant manager. And just working in that space, even just a shift from retail to operations was very jolting. It was very different. And but I was really eager to learn and I was excited for new things. I kind of like change. And I was lucky to have an incredible leadership team and mentors who saw potential and kind of pushed me into opportunities that at the time I was like, are you crazy? Felt a little scary because I had no experience in payments operations and cash management platforms and services, all of this stuff, right? And really, what felt uncomfortable at that time turned out to be a huge gift to me because it really forced me to build out real expertise, not just by relying on experience in one lane, but across multiple disciplines. And then I'm not saying this because I work for Niche, but my financial institution was a Niche member, and finding them and this whole accreditation program for my AAP was a turning point for me. It gave me that technical depth I've been talking about that I didn't have yet. And then I did end up moving on to my APRP, my AFPP, and it completely changed the trajectory of my career. It helped me understand payments end to end. Again, not just operations, but how decisions impact your providers that are providing you with services, the risk, compliance, customer impacts of these changes, and ultimately how it's going to impact the business long term. And at my institution, that showed up in really weird, like real tangible ways. I was better equipped to evaluate provider and system changes because those are constantly updating, right? Assess those updates and streamline processes, but make sure that we're doing it safely. There's no guessing here. I couldn't ask, or I could, I should say, ask better questions when things are arising and when I went into meetings. And it also changed how I supported a team. So not only did I walk into a position in an area that I wasn't really familiar with, but I managed a team who had a lot more expertise than I did. So how could I support them, right? I could share the knowledge I gained, help them understand why we do things a certain way. And I don't know if you know, but change is sometimes difficult for people who have been in processing seats for a long time. And helping them understand the why we could do something better was great, right? That was leading more in less authority, and we're going to do it because we're going to change it, and more influence. Hey, look at how this works better, and here's why. And it really also, I would say, big picture, zoom it out. It helped me connect the dots beyond payments operations. I could see how important money movement was, how it ties into everything a financial institution and really financial services ecosystem itself, everything that everybody does. And it was nice not to feel like I was stuck in one function. I like to be that person that wears multiple hats. And I really think that accreditation helped me develop this nerdy excitement around payments. This is one industry I think you'll not find as many people as passionate about something that most people don't know a ton about the inner workings of. It's a great industry and a great community and network to be a part of. But that was from a financial institution. And Mary, I know you've worked at financial institutions as well, but I'd love to get a particular kind of lesson learned, value lived experience from you in your fintech life prior to niche.
First of all, I love that you mentioned change management because change
Yeah,
management is something that is super difficult.
it is hard.
It was one of the largest topics in my master's degree program, and it's something that most people do not do well. So it's hard on the individuals who go through the change, but mentioning
Oh,
that the why, right, is so important. And that's like change management 101 is making sure that
for
people
sure.
understand, right? Some people you're always going to have to drag kicking and screaming,
Mm,
but some people, when you pull back and you give them that wider view, it makes all the difference and it's
for
super
sure.
important. And from an employee standpoint, right, your person who is doing the exceptions every day, when you pull them back and give them a better look at the entire process, they're going to understand their job better. And that
Excellent.
is like one of the best things about the knowledge that you gain as you're working through studying and achieving these certifications and continuing through with your continuing education credits. From a fintech point of view, we had our own software team. We had our own front end and our own back end, and we connected to our core with a ton of APIs. APIs did everything because it was doing the work between the core and what we were doing on the back end and what our customers were logging in to do on the front end. And we had all kinds of duct tape and band-aids
Yeah.
and weird stuff. There was literally a person at the first core. We did a conversion at one point, but at the first core, he was officially kind of retired, but only semi-retired because he had built most of the updates for our fintech and the way that we
Okay.
use that core, that every time they had to do an update, he was brought in to make sure that none of our stuff broke.
Wow. Okay.
So having that knowledge, right, of how the payment systems work is invaluable when you have a system that non-payments people have built, right? So every time they're building something, right, you have to keep all of that in mind. Like, how is that going to look? How is this going to function? From that to even who are we in this process because of what the type of
Right.
payments that we did,
Right.
just the basics of trying to figure out, okay, so we're not the ODFI because we're not a financial institution. Are we the originator or is this the originator? Or are we a third party sender? Are we a third party service provider? What are we?
What do
Like
we even have to do?
it
I signed
was
that agreement that says I have to meet obligations. What are they?
it
So,
it was complex. Just
yeah.
the entire process was complex, and making sure that the way that our software was built, right,
Mhm.
and we would be able to build things like, you know 15 years ago we had a late return report for ACH and check, right? Because our software team built it. It wasn't in the core. Our core didn't offer it, but they
Mhm.
built it, right? So we had to be able to say, the people who did understand payments had to be able to say, okay, so we get it back at this date from the date that we sent it out and the an effective dated it, that's what's late and that's what needs to hit this report. For a check, this is what it should be, right? So then we had somebody who checked that report every day and they had to go in just to make sure that the report worked, right? So it
Yep.
wasn't feeding it something that was too early. Was it actually a late
Two
return?
controls.
Yes, ma'am. But you had to have somebody who understood all of that in order to build all these like cool little bells and whistles
For
that
sure.
we could have our tech guys build for us that made things easier, because what that would have taken to say, oh, hey, big core, we would like you to build this for us, would have been 11 bajillion dollars
Oh,
and
yeah.
probably 10 years down the road.
I was gonna
But
say you're at the mercy of their timeline too. So that was a benefit a lot of our friends in the community banking space don't have. So yeah.
yeah, and the other part of that is, when you're in the fintech space and you don't necessarily have bankers everywhere, right? you sometimes have to be the person that says, whoa, 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 whoa. I know you think that sounds like a good idea, but here's why it might not be,
Yeah,
kind of a thing to kind of bring it back to, yeah, everybody thinks this is amazing, but the regulators might not think it's amazing.
right.
So to have also that, be able to have that input as well. And in something like that, right, having those credentials and kind of proving yourself, right, and proving your
Yeah,
knowledge, people do look at you differently,
right.
when you are giving, that advice.
100%. Thanks for that. That's a great example. So as we think about where payments are headed quickly, there is, you know, this reality shift a little bit. New technologies, broader industry shifts, they're going to continue to change the pace of things, but they'll also continue to kind of raise the bar for judgment. I keep calling it. So decisions are going to have to be made faster. Accountability will sit closer to the front end, I think. And then the expectation will be that those people understand, again, not just what's happening, but why it matters, where's the risk involved, and how do we manage this, right? So that's where that continuing education really shows its value, because the rules, none of this is static. The rules, the rails, the technologies, expectations from regulators, partners that are coming into the game, even your customer expectations, everything is changing. And accreditations will really help create this workforce that can adapt to this change. And not because they know every answer. I don't know every answer. Mary doesn't know every answer. We serve as each other's resources and everybody else internally, but we do know how to evaluate change responsibly. We help people ask better questions when something's introduced, right? What's changing operationally? What's changing from a risk perspective? What new dependencies are we creating here or there? And then how do we explain those decisions internally to upper and senior board level management and externally to our customers? And getting all of this right isn't about being the fastest to adopt something. You always want to be intentional with adoption, but it's really about being confident in how you're adopting because you're being intentional and being able to stand behind those decisions 6 months or 6 years later. And so that's why, again, I keep saying technical depth, don't underestimate it. I just did a podcast with Nazreen Kibria. And that was one of the first things she spoke to. Don't underestimate the technical depth when it comes to payments. Continuing education, none of this is optional. They're really foundational. And accreditation is a clear, practical pathway to build that depth over time, because future ready payments are going to require future ready people. With that, Mary and I'm going to speak for you, but feel free to jump in, Mary. We just want to say thank you for spending the time with us today. Sorry we got started a little late. We had some technical difficulties. I hope this was of value. It was helpful. It gave you a few new ways to think about continuing education, payments, and how you're preparing yourself and your teams what's next in payments. And if you are headed to Smarter, Faster Payments in San Diego next week, we would absolutely love to see you there and continue the conversation in person. Please come find us. We are in the exhibit hall. We also are the accreditation awareness sponsor. So we'll be speaking on all of these topics in much more depth while we're there. So would love to chat with you and talk a little bit about the challenges and opportunities you guys are working through. So thanks again for joining us today, and we hope to see a lot of you soon.
Thanks all.